Hey everyone, in today's video, I have a deeply moving story to share, packed with life-changing insights. Picture this, a challenging journey that feels like a descent into chaos. Along the way, our main character meets an unexpected millionaire whose astonishing revelation turns her world upside down. Curious about how this encounter reshaped her life? Stick around until the end to find out. And while you're here, drop a comment about where you're from, and don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories like this one. Let's embark on this discovery together. So, let me introduce myself. I'm Clara Bennett, and before diving in, I want to set the record straight. I'm not a writer or a public figure. I'm just someone who's experienced something truly extraordinary and felt compelled to share it. Like many who go through a near-death experience, or NDE as some folks call it, I hesitated to open up about my journey. For years, I kept it all bottled up until I realized it might be beneficial for others. At 35, I used to think I had the ideal life in Seattle, Washington. You know those picture-perfect family snaps you see online? That was my reality: smiling husband, lovely kids, and a neat home. On the outside, everything seemed perfect. My husband, Ryan Mitchell, was regarded by everyone as the perfect partner. Friends would often say to me, "You're so lucky, Clara." Our two children brought endless joy, always affectionate and incredibly bright. I remember a particular morning that foreshadowed the storm that was coming. I was making breakfast when Noah, my youngest, casually asked, "Mommy, why do adults sometimes look happy but feel sad inside?" I gave him the standard mom response about everyone having ups and downs. Little did I know, my own happiness was about to be shattered. Then came that fateful Tuesday when I stumbled upon Ryan's betrayal. I was going through some emails on my computer when I unearthed messages I never wanted to see. It felt surreal, as if I was reading someone else's story, trying to convince myself it was all a mistake. I confronted him that very night after the kids settled in for the night. "You're misunderstanding everything," he said, his calm demeanor infuriating me. But the truth was undeniable. It wasn't just emails. I soon uncovered a whole other life, another woman, another home, and future plans that excluded me. The person I thought I knew for years turned out to be someone else entirely. A week after everything fell apart, I returned home from work to an eerie silence. The house felt utterly lifeless, almost hollow. My children's clothes, their cherished toys, and all the family photos had vanished without a trace. It dawned on me then, Ryan had taken the kids. All he left behind was a note stuck to the fridge that simply read, "It's better this way." Not long after, I crossed paths with Dylan Reed, or Jax as most folks called him. We both found ourselves at the same cafe every morning, an attempt for me to cling to some kind of normalcy, while I desperately sought any clues that might lead me to my children. His face bore the unmistakable marks of someone who had endured hardship. There was a shared understanding, a silent acknowledgement that we both needed something to ease our burdens. One day, he suggested something that he believed could help turn my life around. At that moment, I felt like I had nothing left to lose. I had already seen my whole world crumble. Little did I know how naive I was being. It was one scorching summer night in Seattle, the kind where the heat wraps around you like a suffocating blanket. I was holed up in my room, the curtains drawn tight, a mere sliver of light breaking through the darkness. The air conditioning made a futile attempt to fight off both the sweltering heat and the turmoil inside me. That night, I found myself indulging in more substances than I typically did. Jax had cautioned me before, his voice ringing in my mind. "Slow down, Clara, this isn't who you are." But I wondered, who was I really? Just the deserted wife? The mother who had lost everything? The woman staring back at me from the mirror who I barely recognized anymore? The digital clock on my table read 11:42 p.m., a detail I remember vividly because I stared at those glowing red numbers for what felt like an eternity. It was as if they were alive, swirling in front of my eyes, shifting like liquid. When I tried to rise from my bed, my body refused to cooperate, as if it had betrayed me. Then came this unexplainable chill. It wasn't your everyday cold that a warm blanket could fix. This felt like ice creeping from my fingers, up my arms, sharp and piercing. "Help!" I wanted to scream, but only a faint whisper escaped my lips. The atmosphere around me grew dense, pressing down as if gravity itself had intensified. My heart raced in my chest, its erratic rhythm echoing in the silence of the room, growing louder and more chaotic. The walls felt like they were closing in. As I struggled to move, it felt like I was caught in some heavy fabric, swaying softly in the breeze. The few things I could make out in the dim light looked twisted, almost like they'd been pulled from some bizarre artwork. I tried to grab my phone from the coffee table, but my arm felt weighed down, like it belonged to someone else. "Please, not like this," I whispered, a surge of panic creeping in. Suddenly I began to hear distant melodies. It wasn't music playing near me, it seemed to echo from somewhere deep within. It felt familiar, yet I couldn't pinpoint where I'd heard it. I remember catching a glimpse of something moving in the corner of my eye, a shadow that barely registered. Blinking as hard as I could didn't help. Everything was too blurry. It was as if I were sinking into something thick and treacherous. I fought to resist, pouring every last bit of strength into the effort, but it was all for nothing. "Noah, Ava," I murmured, remembering my children, just before everything faded into darkness. When consciousness began to creep back, the first thing I noted was the eerie silence. It was unlike anything I had ever known, a stillness that seemed to swallow the very essence of sound. I thought I was opening my eyes, but I felt detached, like I was hovering above my body. It was surreal. I could make out every inch of the room with a clarity I had never experienced before. There I was, lying on the bed, seemingly small and delicate, arms still reaching towards the table, hair splayed on the pillow, and a calmness etched across my features. "This isn't real," I told myself, but my thoughts echoed strangely in my mind, reverberating in all directions. It was then that I noticed it, a tunnel of light forming, beginning as a tiny sparkle on what looked like the ceiling and rapidly widening. The walls were not solid. They shimmered with a vibrant energy in colors of blue and white that felt impossible. Each spark danced in intricate harmony, alive with its own rhythm. A force began to draw me towards the tunnel. It wasn't harsh or painful. It felt like the gentle tug of gravity pulling me in the opposite direction. At first, uncertainty held me back. Then I heard a voice, not directed from anywhere, but as if the tunnel itself spoke gently. "Don't be afraid. This is just the beginning of your journey." As I moved through the tunnel, that same melody returned, now more distinct and enveloping. It was transcendent. It was like being surrounded by countless voices, all harmonizing perfectly, yet it didn't quite feel like music. It was more as if every beam of light was singing its own melody. Time felt like it ceased to exist. Was I there for a few minutes or perhaps hours? Who knows? Everything seemed to stretch on forever, yet it all flew by in an instant. As I journeyed through that tunnel, memories began to flicker around me, as if they were being displayed on the walls. I caught glimpses of my past, a joyful childhood spent with my grandmother Clara, the joyous day when I married Ryan, and the moments when my children entered this world. Each scene was brighter, more vivid than I could remember, almost like I was seeing them all through new eyes. I even noticed tiny moments I had overlooked before, sweet gestures I received, kind words that slipped by unnoticed, and chances to lend a helping hand that I chose to pass up. Funny how we truly appreciate these things only when they seem beyond our reach. It felt as though I was viewing my life in high definition. But then everything shifted. The light began to fade, and a harsh cacophony overwhelmed the beautiful sounds that had filled my ears. This sudden change jolted me, catching me utterly unprepared. The once welcoming illumination turned into a heavy, suffocating darkness. It felt like all the peace I had experienced just moments earlier was being vacuumed away by some unseen force. Then hit the smell. A powerful, acrid stench of sulfur invaded my senses, so strong that if I still had a physical form, I would have surely retched. It was a foul blend of decay, burning, and death, an utterly nauseating concoction. "No, please don't," I whispered, my voice barely rising above the panic that swept over me. As the temperature soared, it wasn't like the heat of Seattle. No, this was something profound and primal, an unbearable intensity that felt like it was scorching my very essence. I found myself descending into a landscape that couldn't be described in earthly terms. The ground was a hideous tapestry of blackened rocks and what looked like molten metal, forming agonized faces within its surface. Rivers of lava meandered between rock formations, casting an eerie red glow that heightened the horror surrounding me. That's when I heard it, the screams. Oh my God, the screams. They echoed all around, an endless lament of despair that seeped into every part of my being. These weren't just ordinary cries of pain. They were the wails of souls trapped in perpetual torment. "Mommy? Mommy, is that you?" The voice was unmistakably Noah's, and my heart froze in shock. I screamed in desperation, frantically looking around. But it was a cruel trick of this tormenting place. It was just another echo of the ones I loved, twisted in agony. As I gathered my thoughts, I noticed a scene unfolding around me. There were lost souls, shambling about like mindless creatures, their faces vacant, as if they had forgotten their own identities after being trapped here for too long. Others writhed in pain, trapped in their own personal nightmares. I saw people struggling to climb endless mountains while others fled from shadows that pursued them ceaselessly. Then something caught my eye. A figure drifted towards me. It was a woman, or what remained of her. Her eyes were like dark voids filled with despair. When she spoke, her voice sounded like countless tortured whispers. "You don't belong here yet." Her face twisted, attempting to form a smile. "But it will come back one day. Everyone returns." I tried to distance myself from her, but it seemed like the more I moved, the more lost souls closed in around me. That's when I spotted him. On a jagged obsidian rock was someone strikingly familiar. It was Samuel Prescott, the wealthy mogul from Seattle, a face I had seen in the society sections numerous times. Even though he looked vastly different now, there was no mistaking him. His flashy attire had been replaced by tattered rags, and his once friendly smile had vanished, replaced with an expression that spoke of deep sorrow. I felt a mix of curiosity and sympathy pulling me closer as I approached. He sat there staring at what looked like a flame-licked newspaper that somehow refused to burn away completely. The headlines flickered constantly, showcasing the lives he had ruined in his relentless pursuit of wealth. "Mr. Prescott," I said, my voice unsteady. As he glanced up, I flinched at the profound sadness reflected in his gaze, a haunting look as if he had borne witness to too much pain to ever forget. "One last visit," he murmured, his voice sounding as fragile as crumpling paper. "You've come to see what happens to the rich and powerful when they end up here." Before I could gather my thoughts to reply, a soft glow appeared beside me. An angelic being illuminated the shadows, its presence momentarily lifting the oppressive atmosphere that surrounded us. In the midst of all the chaos surrounding us, it was almost liberating when he finally spoke. His voice cut through the noise, kind of like a melody in a storm. "It's not the wealth that defines us, but what we choose to do with it," the angel declared, looking deeply into both my eyes and Samuel's. Samuel, that billionaire, let out a laugh that felt more like a choked sob. "Do you have any idea how many families I've pushed out?" he exclaimed, words tumbling out in a rush. "I've shattered countless lives to erect yet another extravagant high-rise. I used to brush it off as just business, just how the market operates." As he ranted, a burning newspaper nearby displayed images of a mother weeping while clutching her children, watching their home crumble. I could picture an elderly man forced to leave the only home he ever knew, and whole families curled up on the pavement after he had snatched away the region's only shelter. "The worst part," he choked out, his voice trembling, "is that I had so much money. I could have saved all those people and still walked away wealthy. But it's greed. Greed has no end, does it?" The angel rested a hand gently on my shoulder, his voice low and soothing. "Pay attention," he urged, "because here, everything changes. All the influence and fortune in the world don't mean a thing when we face the outcomes of our decisions." Suddenly, Samuel stood up, arms stretching out to me in desperate supplication. "If you get the chance to return, please tell them it's not the amount of wealth that counts, but how you use it," he implored. But before he could finish, shadows began to envelop him, pulling him back into his own torment. The agonized screams mingled with the endless echoes of sorrow that filled that dreadful place. Each moment felt heavier, as if the very air were thick with torment. I could sense my mind splintering beneath the unbearable burden of suffering. Then, almost imperceptibly, a change occurred. At first, just a light breeze cut through the oppressive heat. I felt a cool caress against my skin. an odd sensation that seemed out of place amidst the suffering. I thought I might be imagining it, but as the breeze strengthened, it carried with it a familiar scent, one that reminded me of my grandmother and her beautiful garden. Then I heard a voice. Unlike the other cries around me, this one was free of anguish. It rang out like delicate crystal bells dancing in the wind. I turned to find the source, a being of light so radiant that it captivated me completely. In that moment, I was overwhelmed by the brilliance surrounding me. Normally, it would have blinded me, but in this ethereal state, I could truly see him. He wore a robe shimmering like liquid light, colors shifting and swirling much like the northern lights. His face radiated a profound compassion that struck me to my core, bringing me down to my knees. "The time has come to leave this valley of shadows," he said gently, reaching out to me. When I took his hand, it felt like plunging into a tranquil sea, washing away the turbulent cries and anguish that once consumed me. But I couldn't help but wonder, do I truly deserve this? Tears rolled down my cheeks as I reflected on my past, the drugs, the way I had turned my back on my children. The figure of light smiled at me, and that expression held more love than all the words ever spoken in human history combined. "True repentance is the first step to redemption," he reassured me. Even amid the pain, his heart exuded a boundless capacity for love. As he spoke, I felt as if my form was becoming lighter, the darkness around us lifting like mist under the morning sun. The stench of sulfur faded away, replaced by scents that reminded me of life's simple pleasures: fresh bread, flowers glistening after rain, and the sweet aroma of my children when they were little. "Close your eyes," the being of light said softly, "and let yourself go." I did what he asked, and it felt like being enveloped in a warm cocoon of radiance, like being hugged by 1,000 caring mothers all at once, a plunge into an ocean of pure, unconditional love. Then came a melody that resonated through my entire being, not just my ears. This harmony was so exquisite that it rendered all earthly music insignificant. "Now open your eyes," the being encouraged in a sing-song voice, "and discover where your heart has always belonged." As I opened my eyes, the nightmare I knew had vanished entirely. Before me lay an indescribable beauty, a place words could never capture. Yet as I began to absorb this breathtaking reality, a familiar figure emerged in the distance. It was my grandmother, Clara, looking just as I remembered from my summer days spent with her. I found myself in a field that seemed to stretch endlessly, the grass an improbable shade of vibrant green, interspersed with luminescent flowers. The sky above wasn't just heaven. It was a dazzling symphony of every color imaginable, all dancing in perfect unity. Grandma Clara was approaching, and I sensed that this was where I truly belonged. I stood a little ways off, watching Clara in her favorite flowery dress. Her silver hair seemed to catch the light, radiating a glow that was utterly captivating. Her face was a blend of peace and joy, something I had never witnessed during her life on Earth. The lines of worry that once marked her features had vanished, yet her eyes held that familiar warmth I cherished. "My little Clara," she called out, opening her arms wide. In an instant, I dashed toward her, just like I used to as a child. When we embraced, it felt like all the pain I had endured, the struggles with addiction, the heartache of losing my children, the hell I had just emerged from, washed away in an overwhelming tide of love. "Grandma," I wept, buried in her comforting embrace. "I've missed you so much. I wish I could talk to you again, seek your guidance." As she ran her fingers gently through my hair, I could almost hear her soothing whispers from my darkest moments. "I was always there, darling," she reminded me quietly. "It was my voice in your heart urging you not to give up." We settled onto a bench that felt almost otherworldly. It shimmered like crystallized light. Time here seemed to stretch, each moment feeling both infinite and fleeting. I found myself spilling everything to her, the struggles with Ryan, my boys, and how drugs had consumed me. She listened with that endless patience she was known for, nodding along. "You know, sometimes we have to lose ourselves before we can truly find who we are," she said thoughtfully. "Do you remember my garden back home?" I nodded, recalling how she nurtured each flower, especially the roses. "Remember how the most stunning blooms often grew where I had pruned them back the hardest?" she asked. I nodded again, beginning to understand. Sometimes we need a deep pruning to help us flourish. You, my dear, are on the verge of blossoming. But Grandma, after everything I've done, I trailed off as she took my hands in hers. Her touch was warm, pulsing with a soothing energy. Clara, you still have a purpose to fulfill. Every experience, even the tough ones, especially those, are like seeds you can plant in others' hearts. You can help those who are lost. As I conversed with Grandma Clara, I noticed a shift in the atmosphere. The air around us felt thicker, buzzing with energy. The flowers glowed brighter, and an ethereal melody filled the space, something far beyond anything I'd encountered on Earth. Clara's eyes sparkled with joy as tears welled up. "He's coming," she said, squeezing my hands tighter. That's when I spotted him. There were no fanfares or heavenly beings heralding his arrival, just the simple, profound reality of the moment. There was something about his presence that put everything else into shadows. As Jesus came closer, his steps felt light, almost as if he were floating on the shimmering grass beneath us. And those eyes, how can you even begin to describe them? It was like he held all the love in the universe within his gaze. When he looked at me, I felt every moment of my life was laid bare, completely understood. There was no judgment, just a profound love that made tears spring to my eyes. "My child," he said softly, his voice echoing in my heart, "you've walked through dark valleys. I'm so sorry." I managed to choke out between sobs. I lost myself so much. He moved closer, taking a seat next to me. It felt like the bench shifted to fit him, a cozy space just for us. The cloak he wore, shimmering like starlight, brushed against my hand. Instantly, a wave of calm washed over me. "Clara," he uttered my name like a beautiful melody. "You were never truly lost. Even during your darkest hours when you felt abandoned, I was there. But the drugs, the way I abandoned my kids—" "You didn't abandon them," he gently interrupted. "They were taken from you. And sometimes, knowing darkness is necessary to truly cherish the light." With a tender touch, he reached out and wiped away my tears. In that moment, memories flooded my mind, not just the painful ones, but also the joyful times. I pictured my children's first smiles, sunny afternoons spent in the garden with Grandma Rose, and even those small acts of kindness that had faded from memory. "You possess a greater purpose than you realize," he continued. "Your journey through the shadows has purpose. Every tear shed, every hardship faced, will shine as a light to guide others." "But how can I help anyone after everything I've done?" I asked, my heart heavy. His smile was like a beacon of hope, filled with the promise of redemption and fresh starts. "It's exactly because of your experiences that you'll be able to lend a hand. Your scars will serve as bridges, connecting you with those who are in the same place you once were. Your story will stand testament that there's always hope, always a way back to the light." As if on cue, Grandma Rose, who had been quietly observing, took my other hand. It felt like we were suspended in a moment that spanned eternity. "You will come back," Jesus assured me. "In tough times, hold on to this moment. Remember, you are never truly alone." But a flicker of fear crept in. "I'm so scared." I found myself reflecting on my struggles. My fear of failing again gnawed at me, but there was a voice that rang clear in my mind. "My strength is made perfect in weakness." Those words had always been familiar, yet now they resonated on a deeper level. I realized that my weaknesses were not something to dread. Rather, they became the channels through which light could shine. The journey back felt unlike the way I came. Instead of a tunnel, there was simply this overwhelming heaviness settling into my body. The sweet sounds of a blissful paradise faded, replaced by the relentless beeping of hospital machinery. The fragrant essence of blooming flowers was gone, now replaced by the harsh smell of antiseptic and medicine. Pain was the first sensation that greeted me, sharp and undeniable, yanking me back to reality. As I struggled to open my eyes, they felt heavy, as though weights were strapped to my lids. I could hear voices, but they seemed distant, muffled as though coming from the end of a long hall. "She's coming back. Pressure stabilizing. Call the doctor," someone said. When I finally peeled my eyes open, the harsh fluorescent light stabbed at me, leaving me momentarily blinded. A nurse was hovering nearby, her eyes reflecting a blend of worry and relief. "Welcome back," she whispered gently. "You really had us worried." My throat was parched, making it difficult to respond. A nurse extended a small glass of water with a straw, and as I sipped, I sensed a profound change within myself. That empty void, the endless darkness that substances had tried to fill, was gone. The days that came afterward were a blur. I was inundated with tests, social workers dropping by, and conversations with psychologists. Everyone seemed desperate for answers. Why had I turned to drugs? Was it an attempt at ending it all? Trying to articulate such a transcendent experience into their earthly terms felt almost impossible. "You were very fortunate," the doctor remarked during his morning rounds. It was close. I chuckled internally, recognizing that he had no inkling of the depth of my journey. The luck he spoke of had a face, eyes ablaze with love, and a purpose far beyond anything he could fathom. The road to recovery was far from smooth. My body craved what it was accustomed to, and the drugs had woven through my system for far too long. But this time, it felt different. Whenever withdrawal hit like a brick wall, I closed my eyes, finding solace in memories. Grandma Rose's comforting hug, the gentle gaze of Jesus, even the terrors of hell. All of these recollections acted as an anchor, guiding me steadfastly on my recovery journey. I made the decision to check myself into a rehabilitation center located just outside of Seattle. It was a modest place, yet welcoming, ideal for what I needed. In the early weeks after everything happened, sleep was elusive. I found myself gazing out of my bedroom window, replaying every moment in my mind, terrified that I might forget even the smallest detail. "You seem different," noted Maria, my roommate at the recovery center. Most people around us carried a look of loss, but she saw something alive in my eyes. How could I possibly explain to her that I had glimpsed what lies beyond death? Instead, I just smiled and held her hand when she cried through her withdrawals. Despite the challenges, my determination to find my children surged with newfound energy. It was no longer a frantic and destructive chase. I was convinced that our paths would cross at the right time. I dove into social media, actively crafting posts for them, yearning for the day they might stumble upon my words. Then came an ordinary spring Sunday, one that would change everything. As I scrolled through my email, my heart skipped a beat. "Mom, it's us, Noah and Ava." My hands trembled, making it hard to grip my phone. The message went on, "We saw your posts. Dad told us his side of the story, but we're old enough to find out the truth for ourselves. Can we meet?" Just 2 weeks later, our reunion unfolded in a public park in Seattle. As they walked towards me, it felt surreal to see how much they had grown. Noah had exceeded my height, and Ava's expressive eyes still sparkled, though now they also reflected years of maturity and longing. "Mom," Ava said, her voice filled with unspoken years. That single word carried so much emotion that we all embraced right there in the park, overwhelmed with tears and laughter. As we settled down with some ice cream, Noah remarked, "You look different?" "Yeah, a lot has happened," I replied, choosing my words carefully. "I went through some really tough times, but I also experienced things that transformed my life." It was during that period that I finally chased an old dream, traveling to Japan. After months of saving, I made that journey in 2011, but fate had a lesson in store for me. While I was there, the devastating Fukushima earthquake struck. Witnessing nature's overwhelming power was a brutal reminder of life's fragility. I remember helping at a makeshift shelter when an elderly woman took my hand. She spoke something in Japanese that was later translated, "Your eyes know pain, but they also know peace." In that moment, I reflected on how my near-death experience had oddly equipped me for that very reality, and remarkably, fear was absent from my heart. You know, during that earthquake, I really felt a strong bond with everyone around me. Each person was dealing with their own struggles. Fast forward to now, my life has taken on a new shape. I spend weekends with Noah and Ava. They mean the world to me. I also volunteer at a rehab center, not as a certified counselor or a teacher, but just as someone who listens. I hold the hands of those who need it, sharing in their pain. I really mean that when I say, I understand what you're going through. I'm not out here forming groups, writing books, or giving speeches. My purpose is more intimate and personal. Sometimes, on those still nights, I catch a whiff of that paradise flower perfume. It brings back memories of beautiful music, and I can't help but smile. All the tough times I've faced have led me to this exact point in my life. There's this quote I once stumbled upon. Sometimes God lets you hit rock bottom to help you find that He is the rock at the bottom. I didn't just hit bottom, I went further. I've glimpsed both hell and heaven, and I'm back to share my journey, not for fame, but to show that hope is always within reach, and there's always a way back to brightness. Now, when people ask me if fear of death creeps in, I just smile. I'm not afraid because I truly believe death isn't the final chapter. It's merely a doorway to something far grander than we can comprehend. But what's worth noting is how valuable every moment we have in this life is. Each breath, a gift. Each chance to love or lend a hand, something sacred. So this story of mine isn't a typical success tale. It's one of falling and rising again, embodying both darkness and light, touching on themes of death and rebirth. It's a narrative that keeps unfolding, one day, one hug, one transformed life at a time. I hope that somewhere out there, someone battling their own shadows might read this and grasp a glimmer of hope. Because if there's anything my journey has taught me, it's that none of us are ever truly alone. Even in our darkest hours, there's a light that leads us back home.